Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1978 horror classic, Dawn of the Dead. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Now, Dawn of the Dead, to me, is one of those films that lives up to its reputation and then some. It's a film that I personally feel always has meat on the bone. It's always a film that I enjoy sinking my teeth into and digging up and checking it out every October. It's a movie that just gets better each time I see it. It's aged like a fine wine. It's one of those sequels that to me personally is also better than its predecessor. It's a film that is just absolutely phenomenal on so many different levels. It's even a movie that for a film this old, a film that is 45 years old as of this recording, still holds up and still has a modern vibe to it when it comes to its storytelling, its characterization, and other elements of the production. And that's what gives this film a genuinely timeless quality to it. Yeah, it's a 70s film. Yes, there are some things that are a bit dated compared to today in terms of some of the stuff that's going on in the mall or the video game arcade sequence and a few other things or the limitations of practical effects at the time. But when it comes to the way that things are structured, when it comes to the plot, the way that the characters are built up and introduced, the way that the action is showcased, the way that a lot of other elements of the film are displayed is very modern and was very ahead of its time in 1978. Now, the film is directed by George Romero, who directed the original Night of the Living Dead, and he initially didn't really have any plans on doing another zombie film for a long time because he really didn't want that to be what he was known for. And I understand that thought process. I really do. He didn't want to be typecast as the zombie guy or the horror guy, which sadly is what happened. But I think that's honestly because that's really what Romero is the best at. I think that it was just one of those things where fate intervened and Romero became a horror director. And he tried to do some stuff like There's Always Vanilla and some other things after Night of the Living Dead that weren't necessarily horror films, and they didn't do well at all. And even something like The Crazies, which there's some horror elements in it, but it's more of a thriller, and it has like sci-fi aspects in terms of the virus and uh really deals with a lot with like paranoia and stuff like that. It's not your typical sort of horror film, but he was inspired by a friend of his who I believe either owned the Monroeville Mall or was definitely somewhat involved with the mall in some capacity. So he was able to see parts of the mall that the public doesn't see. He was able to essentially just get a tour of the entire mall, shops and all. And while he was going on this tour, he came up with an idea. He was like, well, this mall actually might be a good place to hole up if there was some kind of apocalyptic scenario. And that's where he decided to come up with the idea that ultimately became Dawn of the Dead. And Romero got a script together, and he had a lot of things ready to go, but he struggled to find financing because he wanted this to be a bigger, more epic film, and no studio wanted to fund his project, which was a rerun of what happened when he tried to get studios to fund Night of the Living Dead, or at least distribute the film. all the major studios refused. And that still was the case even after he finished this film. Once again, could not find a major studio to distribute it because they just felt it was too controversial and too violent and not a film that they wanted to associate themselves with. But what's crazy is another legendary horror director is one of the main catalysts when it comes to this film being made, and that's Dario Argento. Dario Argento was a big fan of Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and when he saw that Romero was trying to find financing for another zombie film and a sequel, he did whatever he could. He pulled the strings and came up with the money and co-produced and co-financed the film, and the rest is history. And that's why you actually have the Argento cut, is because Dario Argento did a version of the film, um, helped edit it, and even put in new music and things like that for the Italian market. And when it comes to the United States, it was released by a company called United Film Distribution, which was an independent company. If you really break it down, George A. Romero was truly one of the greatest indie filmmakers of our time. Because you look at what he did with Night of the Living Dead, even though I'm not a big fan of that film, I still appreciate and respect what he did with that film with so little, and how he was able to still find distribution and still make an impact despite working with independent studios and essentially working with a lot of his own money. And in Dawn of the Dead, it's a similar thing. And the movie was quite successful. It was quite successful for the time when it was eventually released in the United States and worldwide, despite it only having a budget of like $640,000. It didn't even cost $1 million at the time. It was it wasn't a super cheap production, because $640,000 adjusted to inflation is still a decent amount of money for the time. But yeah, I really do feel that he is one of the greatest indie filmmakers out there. I mean, he released the film unrated because he refused to agree with the demands of the MPAA, and that of course made it even harder to find distribution. But he stuck to his guns and found someone who was willing to release it, and the film was still a hit, and was a hit with critics too. Like Roger Ebert thought it was one of the best horror films that he had seen up until that point. And Romero, at this point as a director, you can tell that he's gotten even better as a filmmaker in terms of the setup of his shots, the way that he moves the camera around, the way that he utilizes pans and zooms, the way that he uh, uses the camera to create a certain mood and atmosphere. I think black and white was kind of limiting in terms of what Romero was capable of. When he's able to work with color film, he's able to make visuals that are just so much more eye-catching and just eye-popping and just really stark and striking. Romero has mentioned numerous times throughout the years when it comes to his vision for this film, and talked about how it was very much intended to be comic book, a comic book zombie epic. And you definitely do get a sense and a feel of that when it comes to the way that he shoots the action scenes, the way that he shoots the film in general. It does have this very comic book style and flair to it. And I think that really works. I honestly do. And he does a great job balancing different styles and tone throughout the movie. There are scenes that are very grim, they're very dark, but then there's also scenes that are honestly pretty campy and a little over the top, but everything still blends together well. There's not a lot of jarring moments where things are out of place visually, or when it comes to his overall concept for his look and feel for the film. Uh, and his screenplay is spectacular. It's a really stellar script. It has social commentary, but this time around, it's more evident. It's definitely something that's more prevalent throughout the script. It's not just there in bits and pieces. The way that he discusses and showcases the problems of consumerism in society is some of the best that I've ever seen any script do when it comes to that topic. And the way that he has this subtext strewn in throughout the script is something that I think a lot of modern writers and filmmakers could honestly learn from, because he has the subtext here, but it's not all the text. He still has likable and engaging characters with a lot of lines, dialogue, and moments for them to shine and to really connect with an audience. And he has a consistently engaging plot when it comes to them trying to survive this zombie apocalypse in this mall. And the inconsistencies of the script are very minor. Just some stuff with some of the tone, like the scene where the bikers come in and they're throwing pies in zombies' faces. I mean, I personally felt that was a little bit too out of place. Some of the stuff with the zombie versus the biker stuff also went on a bit too long. So there's a few moments like that where the script is not up to, let's just say, its full potential, or it's not consistently great in that regard. But for the most part, though, it's still a great, brilliant script. It does a really good job with its characters, establishing them early on, and then throwing in bits of character development and depth throughout the film. It's not one of those screenplays that just gives you an information dump or gives you just all these characters' backstories like in the first 30 minutes and doesn't really give you a lot of anything new throughout the rest of the movie. The story is just chock full of just crazy scenes with crazy carnage and violence and insanity and pure chaos. Like the opening of the film is just a chaotic mess at a news station where everybody is just freaking out, and it's a very realistic and raw look at what would happen if something like this were to occur in reality. One of the first things that would happen is that the media would go fucking nuts. The media would lose their shit. They wouldn't know what to do, and and it would just be pure and just unabated chaos. So it's just one of those things that from the opening scene, and then even after that with the SWAT team and or the zombie hunter squad, however you want to call it, and they go in and they're supposed to be taking out these zombies, but the mental toll has been so strong on some of these uh, zombie hunters that one of them is just completely flipped, and now he's just shooting people in the head who aren't even zombies. And then you have these moments where you get a glimpse of other characters, you get a little bit of what who they are and what their place is in the story, and then they convene and they team up, so to speak, and they find a common goal. The common goal is survival, and they find this mall, and they decide to do what they can to clear it out of these zombies and turn it into a stronghold. And yeah, the zombie scenes are thrilling, and the way that they're set up is just really well done, and it's tense, and I wouldn't necessarily call it scary, but it's definitely something that does provide a lot of suspense and genuine thrills, the way that things are written, and definitely the way that things are shown on the screen with all the headshots and all of the other various gory scenes. But there's a certain reality to a lot of it, and the way that it's written that just grounds things in a way that just makes it feel so much more real and relatable, and just makes the connection between these characters so much stronger. And I honestly love so many of the bloody bits in the film with the practical effects and knives in the head, and then heads getting blown up with gun blasts, and throats being ripped out and arms being bitten off and people getting eaten and so on and so forth. I love that stuff. But to me, what really elevates this film are scenes where you have the cast trying to create some semblance of a normal life in the midst of an apocalypse. So the scenes where the cast, or the cast of characters are just hanging out in the mall, shopping, playing games in the arcade, having a nice dinner, just trying to hold some grip on what once was amidst everything that's going on. And I think that just is really compelling stuff. And yeah, the final battle with the zombies and the bikers is fun stuff. And I love the ending of the movie. I know originally the ending was going to be different. The original ending of the script was far bleaker, with two suicides, essentially, where the two survivors wind up taking their own lives, and they would have had an ending that was similar to the ending in the first movie. I'm glad that didn't actually happen. I'm glad Romero and other people involved with the production changed their mind and went with a more happy ending, so to speak. It's still not that happy because they're going to run out of gas in the helicopter, and it doesn't really seem like this is a apocalypse that has any end in sight anytime soon. It's kind of similar to the ending of John Carpenter's The Thing, where it's bleak, but and it's still one of those things where there's a little bit of hope, maybe, that they might make it out or they might survive, but the odds are definitely against them. It's that kind of thing. And I just love the scene where the character played by Ken Foree, and I know I should remember these characters' names more, but yeah, Peter. So Ken Foree's character Peter, he decides to forgo the suicide and just kicks at zombie ass, and then gets back onto the helicopter with Fly Girl, with Fran. I love that. I love that scene. It's a real crowd pleasing moment, and there's just a lot of great scenes like that in the movie dealing with the characters. The stuff with Flyboy and his whole relationship with Francine, and how sweet that is, but also how they have their own contentious sort of back and forth with one another. it leads to the scene where Flyboy's a zombie and he leads the horde of zombies to their hiding spot, and it makes the scene tragic. It makes a very tragic scene when it comes to everything just completely falling apart in this fashion because of the time that the two shared with one another. Like there's that whole scene where he wants to marry her, but she refuses because she feels like this just isn't the right time, and it wouldn't feel real. Like that's the kind of stuff that really makes the film and the screenplay just have so much more to it than just an over the top comic book style zombie action movie. And you have other stuff like that with the dynamic with Trooper and Peter, and the scene where Peter has to ultimately shoot his friend. He has to wait for him to turn into a zombie and then shoot him. And there was a lot of emotion in that scene. There's a lot of tragedy in that scene as well. There's a lot of human elements when it comes to this screenplay. I actually felt like these were flesh and blood people, not just characters that were written for the screen. I actually felt like I was watching real people interact with each other and try to survive a zombie apocalypse inside this mall. Where in the original Night of the Living Dead, I never really felt like any of them were real people except for the lead, Ben. But here, like, everyone feels very fleshed out. And it's just a good example of you can have a film that has a small cast, but it still has a big impact because of the strength of the script, because of the strength of these characters and what Romero brings to them. That he really does build up their DNA and their heart and their soul in a way that is very effective. And that's why I think the happy ending works. Because I think if it ended more in a more bleak fashion, I don't really feel it would be that satisfying. And I don't really feel it would have connected that well with the overall tone of the movie. It's a comic book style zombie action film with some very real, raw human emotions and characters that the audience grows to love. So I really feel that being too bleak would be a detriment to the film. But that choice was not made, and that was definitely for the best. Uh, I cannot sing enough praises for Romero's work when it comes to this screenplay. Like I said, only minor nitpicks when it comes to this script, like the pie in the face scene, some of the stuff with the bikers and how that scene went on a bit too long. But other than that, no issues whatsoever in terms of the way that this was written, the way that it was set up. I mean, it even has fun lines of dialogue with characters. Like it has everything that you want out of a entertaining horror film that entertains your intellect as well as, you know, that need for popcorn fun when it comes to uh, a film in this genre. The cast is also terrific. I mean, it's a tremendous cast. I don't think that the film would be as effective as it is, even with how good the script is, without the right cast. And everyone is just cast perfectly here. David Emge as Flyboy, Andrews, Ken Foree as Peter Washington. Loved Ken Foree's performance. Uh, Scott Reiniger as Trooper. Gaylen Ross as Fran. I think Gaylen Ross's performance is a little more overlooked than the other three because I think some people kind of look at her character like she's kind of bitchy, but I think the way that she was acting and behaving throughout a good chunk of the movie was understandable because a lot of the team was not really making her aware of everything that was going on. And on top of that, she was pregnant. So she was probably dealing with other stuff that was going on chemically in her body that was maybe causing her to be a little bit more emotional. That's an actual real side effect of pregnancy. So I think the way that she portrayed the character was still very realistic, and I think she still managed to make the character likable. I still felt for her. I still ultimately liked her because she actually had some moments where she fought and she fended for herself. Not necessarily the same capacity as the other three guys, as Steven, Peter, and Roger, but still she wasn't a useless catatonic. And yeah, I really like uh, uh, the dynamic and the chemistry between Ken Foree and Scott Reiniger. They were a great pair. They were a lot of fun together. It was really sad when Trooper got bit and then slowly turned into a zombie. And Ken Foree showed a lot of range as an actor because he showed that he could not only be the tough guy, but he could also show the other parts of the character in an equally effective fashion. Like he could show the scenes where he's being emotional and he's upset and he's struggling with having to kill his best friend. You can see that he's struggling with the situation at the end where he's contemplating suicide but then ultimately chooses a different path. Like you can see that conflict, and it's very real and it's believable because of what Ken Foree brings to the role. For whatever reason, he never really went on to have a pretty significant career as a actor, especially when it comes to having lead roles. Like he had some big roles in like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 and some other things, but it's like one of those things where he just never really had a career that took off, and I think he definitely deserved better than that, especially after his work in this. In fact, a lot of these actors, like Dawn of the Dead, was the honestly the last film that David Emge was in until he was in Basket Case 2. That's what it looks like. He didn't do much of anything after Dawn of the Dead, except some bit roles in a couple films. Scott Reiniger, um, kind of the same thing. He was in Night Riders for a little bit, was in something called The Other Victim, was a truck driver at Falcon Crest, and that was it. Like Gaylen Ross, she was in a few things. Seems like she had a little bit more films that she was in. I mean, she was in Mad Men, she was in Creepshow. Um, she directed some stuff. I think a lot of it was like TV movies or low budget films, but uh, she went on to, it seems like, have more opportunities than a lot of people in the cast. I mean, Ken Foree, I think, could have gone on to bigger and better things, but at least he still had a more consistent career compared to the other stars in the film who didn't really go on to do that much at all. And it's a shame because Scott Reiniger, it's another performance that was just really nuanced and had a lot of layers to it. The scenes where he's disabled and he's losing a lot of his faculties are very strong. Some great acting by him. The scene where he wakes up as a zombie is heartbreaking and horrifying at the same time because of what he's able to bring to that performance. Same thing for David Emge when he's a zombie and the way that he played that uh, um, role. And the cinematography by Michael Gornick was great. It really did showcase the zombies well and the lurid colors and everything about the movie. The mall really felt like its own character because of the way that Gornick shot the film alongside Romero. Gornick and Romero just had a really good connection with one another when it comes to their vision of Dawn of the Dead. The film also features some excellent editing by Giorgio Romero that was very evident in the various gore scenes and the sequences of carnage and destruction. And I think the score, which was a lot of stock music. I think it was still something that fit the movie well, was still quirky and creepy when it needed to be. The Goblin score for the Argento cut is a much more fun listen, but in the Argento cut itself, it's a bit overbearing. Um, and speaking of the Argento cut, like there are things that I like about it, but I don't necessarily feel the faster pace really helps this movie because it cuts out a lot of the scenes that just make the film feel like it's more than just a zombie action film. And I think that really takes away a lot from this film. So I definitely prefer the theatrical cut of the movie. I still haven't seen the Cannes cut or the Mall Hours cut, maybe one of these days, but I have seen the Argento cut, and I love Dario Argento, and I can have some fun with that version if I just want to put on essentially a gory effects show. That's kind of what the Argento version is with Goblin in the background. It's kind of like watching a Dawn of the Dead music video at times with a soundtrack by Goblin. Which there's some fun to be had with that. And of course, you can't talk about Dawn of the Dead without talking about Tom Savini, who did the effects, but who was also in the movie as one of the bikers and did his own stunts. The effects here, compared to some of the stuff that Tom Savini would do later in his career, are not necessarily as technically impressive. But considering the budget, considering that Savini until this movie really hadn't done effects this big, I still think it's rather incredible. Like the stuff like the helicopter zombie, the scene where the guy gets the knife in the head, um, just various other sequences like the headshot scenes and so on. Just some really great practical makeup effects with a low budget, at least when it comes to a lot of films at the time, and this, even nowadays. And I know Savini didn't care for the blood and thought it looked too bright. And yeah, it doesn't look like real blood, but that just adds to the comic book style and flair of the film. So I don't think it's really necessarily a problem. And so is like the design of the zombies. Like, yeah, a lot of it's just they're wearing gray or green face paint and just a little bit of blood and maybe a few other little imperfections, but not really a lot to differentiate them personality wise or design wise from one another. But there's still attempts. I mean, you got a Hari Krishna zombie, and you got some other zombies that you can definitely tell that there was a clear intent by Savini and his team to make the some of the zombies a little bit more uh, um, striking visually, and especially the one that is pretty iconic, the one that has like the messed up face, who it shows up early in the movie. Um, I do I do remember when I first saw this film and I saw that zombie, I was honestly expecting maybe a bigger scene with that zombie because of the zombie, being used on the poster and all of that. But in the movie itself, the zombie doesn't really do that much. So I remember that being like a bit of a letdown, but not to the point where I was like, "Oh, fuck this movie." Like, no, there was so much other things to like and love about the film that really wasn't that big of a deal at all. But yeah, I can't really think of any other things that I want to say about this excellent, just tremendous, just daring, innovative, great film. Except if you were able to get the second sight 4K set, like, count yourself lucky, count yourself blessed, because now that is out of print and that goes for a crazy high price tag nowadays. Um, it's a shame that Rubenstein was such a just absolute stickler and that's putting it lightly when it comes to the rights for this film, because I think that every horror fan should have the opportunity to have this set, or at least have the 4K release from Second Sight. And preferably this set, because it has all the cuts of the film and a bunch of other features and a bunch of other things that I think any fan of the horror genre would definitely be into. And it's definitely one of my favorite box sets that I own. The Second Sight release of this film. But anyway, yeah, that's all I have to say about George A. Romero's classic Dawn of the Dead. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.